Not everything deserves your reaction. You need to understand this, not to suppress your emotions, but to reclaim control over your life. There are situations, people, and words that exist solely for one purpose: to steal the peace from your mind. And if you've never stopped to recognize that, you're being pulled into an exhausting loop without even realizing it. Not because you're weak, but because you're too easily stirred by things that have nothing to do with the person you're trying to become. People will always have something to say. Some don't understand you but enjoy judging. Some don't walk your path but think they're qualified to assess it. You respond, you explain, you justify, and little by little your energy is drained in a battle that has no end. And then what happens? You're tired but don't know why. You're angry but not sure at whom. You feel like you're fighting the whole world when in truth all you really need is the freedom to live as your authentic self. You don't have to answer every cruel remark. You don't have to clear up every misunderstanding. You don't have to engage in conversations that are designed to push you out of your peace. Because the essence of provocation is to make you react. And when you react, you're handing over your power to someone else, someone who does not deserve to control your mood, dictate your actions, or influence your path. There is a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from the body, but from constantly living in a state of having to react, having to prove you're right, having to show you're not weak, having to protect your ego from being wounded. But it's precisely that have to that's imprisoning you. It makes you respond like a machine instead of living like a free human being. And that's why you need to train yourself to become someone who is unshaken by. True strength doesn't belong to the one who reacts quickly, but to the one who knows when to react and when to remain silent. The one who understands that reactions consume energy, and energy is not infinite. Every time you respond to an insult, you spend a piece of your life on something meaningless. Every time you argue with someone who has no intention of understanding, you place yourself in a position of weakness, because the one who controls the reaction controls the outcome. Observe the great ones. They don't speak up when misunderstood. They don't refute every attack. They let their actions speak. They let the results prove everything. Because they know noise doesn't create value. Reaction doesn't create change. Focus and discipline are the foundation of transformation. And if you want to rise, you must learn to be selective about where you place your energy. Not every offense deserves space in your mind. You don't stay silent because you're weak. You stay silent because you've chosen a different game. One that no longer revolves around winning or losing, no longer led by impulsive emotion. You choose not to react because you're investing in the future, in a greater vision, in the person you're becoming each day. That's why your silence starts to confuse people. They don't understand why you're not angry, not defending, not participating. But in that very moment, you're holding the upper hand. Because your silence is not surrender. It's a statement, I've outgrown this. If you want to go far, you must learn to leave behind what no longer deserves a place in your inner space. Every thought, every feeling, every reaction is a unit of energy, and if you scatter it too thin, you'll run out of strength for what truly matters. Don't let trivial things shape how you experience life. You can't build an empire if you're constantly swayed by external provocation. Peace is not something you find, it's something you choose. Every time you maintain your calm, you affirm one truth: I am the one in charge. Not circumstances, not others, not impulsive emotions, me. And that is when you step into a new level where you no longer need to react because you're in command of the entire system. You don't need to react to everything. You need to be selective. You need to reserve your energy for what truly matters. Because in the end, you won't be measured by how often you fought back, but by how you held your ground when nothing else did. And only those who understand this can rise to the highest level. People see your silence and assume you've become cold. They notice you no longer react, no longer yield, no longer explain, and they conclude that you've become numb, emotionless, indifferent, but they're wrong. You haven't become cold. You're simply learning how to keep your mind free. And true freedom doesn't lie in what you say, it lies in your ability to choose not to speak when it's unnecessary. It's not emotional dryness, it's the pinnacle of awareness when you've seen through the essence of words, judgments, and the scripts others try to pull you into. You no longer react, not because you feel nothing, but because you no longer want to be controlled by fleeting emotions. Your silence isn't distance, it's a boundary. It's a quiet declaration that you've stopped allowing others to influence your inner rhythm. You haven't frozen your emotions, you just no longer let them dictate your actions. And that is a rare kind of freedom because it requires you to rise above ego, above anger, above the need to prove, to be right, to be understood. This world loves drama. People are used to loud comebacks, heated arguments, theatrical promises. In a society where reaction is seen as proof of feeling, your calmness is almost mistaken for numbness. But look closer. Quick reactions have never been a sign of strength. They only prove one thing: you're being led. But when you can observe without rushing to respond, you are in control. You're not being pulled. You're just steering yourself. Inner freedom is when you're no longer driven by the need to prove anything. When you can walk away from a tense conversation without feeling like you've lost. When you can choose not to explain, not to justify, not to respond and still feel whole. That's when you realize you don't need validation to know you're on the right path. That's when you know you don't need to put out every fire. You just need to stop walking into places that are already burned down. You haven't become indifferent. You're choosing a strategy. You haven't lost compassion. You just no longer want to fill your life with draining interactions. You're not indifferent to everything. You've just come to understand that your inner peace is worth more than any justification. Outsiders don't see your inner work. They don't know how many times you've had to hold yourself back, how many times you've swallowed your pain, how many times you've chosen silence in the middle of a storm. They don't understand that you're not rejecting emotions. You're refining them so they don't sweep you away. And because they can't see that inner struggle, they think you've become cold. In truth, you are warmer than ever, but with yourself. You no longer live to please others. You no longer feel guilty for setting boundaries. You no longer sacrifice your mental safety just to maintain a fragile relationship. You've made a clear choice. You prioritize inner peace over external approval, and that is a courageous choice because it means you'll be misunderstood. You'll be labeled as cold, emotionless, arrogant. But you accept that because you've lived long enough to know that the price of being constantly liked is losing yourself. Freedom is when you can walk away from chaos without having to explain why. When you no longer let others' words define you. When you don't need to win the argument, don't need to be right, don't need someone's recognition to feel complete. You're not cold, you're simply returning to your center. A place no longer pulled by the need to control others, no longer swayed by the urge to be accepted. You're not extinguishing emotion, you're guiding it. Not letting it explode, not letting it disappear, but letting it flow in the right direction. When you choose silence instead of anger, no one knows how much fire is burning quietly inside you. When you withdraw from a conflict, no one sees how many layers of instinct you've had to overcome just to stay grounded. But you know. And as long as you know, that's enough. Because you don't live to prove that you're strong, you live to be strong. And the strong don't react to every little thing. They don't scatter their emotions everywhere. They don't live in the role of the victim. They are the choosers. They know exactly where their energy is going. And if you are learning how to hold your calm, are on your way to becoming one of them. Not someone cold, but someone free. Reaction is instinct, mastery is intelligence. And the difference between someone who lives being led and someone who takes control of their destiny begins the moment they learn to hold back their first reaction. Because what causes you to lose in most situations isn't the person in front of you, it's the unprocessed emotions inside of you. You get triggered by a word, a look, a petty action, and you snap back like a spring that's been compressed for too long. But what you don't realize is, every time you react, you're letting someone else steer the boat of your emotions. And if you keep letting your reflexes take the wheel, don't be surprised when you find yourself stuck in the same pattern, triggered, out of control, and filled with regret afterward. You need to understand this clearly. Reacting is not always a sign of strength. Sometimes it's simply a manifestation of inner instability. The weak are those who can't endure, can't wait, can't distinguish between a battle that must be fought and a trap that must be walked away from. Strength is not about always winning. It's about choosing the right time to act, knowing when silence is wisdom and when speaking up is necessary. Because not everything needs a performance. Sometimes you win simply by not participating. You were not born to be a puppet of your emotions. You have intelligence, reason, the ability to observe and analyze. But if you keep letting anger control your behavior, letting ego lead your words, then you're destroying the very foundation that gives you real power. Mastering emotions doesn't mean suppressing everything. It means choosing how to express yourself without self-destruction. You can still feel anger, still feel pain, but you act from awareness, not impulse. That is true maturity. Have you ever noticed that people who get angry easily, who are easily dragged into conflict, are often the ones who are easiest to manipulate? They think they're showing strength, but in reality they're being remotely controlled. A few provoking words, a challenging look, that's all it takes to switch them into attack mode, and they think that's power. But in truth, they've lost control without even realizing it. As for you, if you truly want to step out of that loop of emotional manipulation, you have to pause and ask yourself, what is this reaction serving? Am I reacting from a wound or from wisdom? The difference is crystal clear. When you react from a wound, you're trying to protect your damaged ego. You want someone to know you're angry, hurt, that this won't be tolerated. But when you react from wisdom, or more precisely, act from wisdom, you see the bigger picture. You know the cost of reacting immediately. Stolen peace, a distorted self-image, and unnecessary exhaustion, and you choose not to play. I'm not saying you should become passive, resigned to enduring everything. No, I'm talking about a higher form of power, the power of someone with strategy. You know exactly what's going on, you feel its impact, but you choose a calculated response, not because you're scared, but because you don't want to waste energy on battles that bring nothing but loss. Mastery doesn't mean never getting angry, never feeling disappointment. Mastery means you know exactly what's going on inside you, but you don't let it override your inner operating system. You manage your emotions the way an engineer handles data. Analyze, assess, and respond based on long-term impact, not short-term emotion. This takes practice. But every time you pause for a beat before reacting, you're strengthening your inner control system. You don't need to win every conversation. You just need to make sure your anger doesn't cause you to lose yourself. You don't need to put out every fire. You just need to ensure your inner home doesn't burn down from sparks that come from outside. And if you can do that, you've stepped into a higher version of yourself. One who doesn't live by reaction, but by mastery. That is the person no one can shake, no one can control, no one can drag into a battle they didn't choose. And you, if you're alert enough, will become that person. Not someone driven by emotions, but someone who creates outcomes with true inner power. When someone makes you angry, the first thing you need to do isn't to respond, but to ask yourself, why does this touch me so deeply? Because the truth is, no one can trigger you unless there's already something inside you that remains unhealed. Other people merely press the button, but that button was already there, waiting for an event, a word, a look to bring it to the surface. And the moment you get triggered by something seemingly small, that's when life is pointing directly at the wound you've been avoiding, not to hurt you more, but to give you a chance to grow. You often believe that what makes you angry is someone else's fault. They were disrespectful, they behaved badly, they didn't understand you. But if you pause long enough to observe, you'll realize that the anger doesn't arise from their actions. It comes from the sense of threat inside you. A threat to the image you've built, to the beliefs you hold, to old wounds you've never fully faced. And if you keep reacting out of defense, you'll never see the message that the trigger is trying to deliver. There's a truth few people are willing to accept. Those who are most easily hurt are also the ones most easily triggered. They don't react because they're strong, they react because they're trying to hide their fragility. They shout, not because they're sure they're right, but because they're afraid no one will listen. They attack, not because they're powerful, but because they don't know another way to protect themselves. But if you're brave enough to take a step back and observe your emotions instead of acting from them, you'll begin to see a hidden roadmap for personal growth within every wound. Maturity is not about avoiding emotions, it's about understanding every movement of emotion so it doesn't drown you. Every time you feel insulted, dismissed, judged, instead of pushing back, ask yourself, what part of me is being touched? Maybe it's a wound of unacknowledgement from the past. Maybe it's the memory of being abandoned, overlooked, or misjudged. And only when you dare to sit with that feeling, to dig deeper into the real reason, can you break the old cycle. No one grows from comfort. You don't learn anything when everything goes smoothly, but you learn a great deal when you're triggered and still manage to stay calm. You become sharper, more refined, more deeply aware of yourself, not because of peaceful days, but because of the days you almost lost control and still held your ground. Every time that happens, you're not just overcoming a situation, you're training a new layer of emotional muscle. Each time you choose composure over rage, you are building a stronger version of yourself. Remember, others may deliberately try to trigger you to gain control. They may test you through condescension, through reopening old wounds, through cloaked jealousy disguised as toxic advice. And they wait for your reaction the way a provoker waits to see your wound bleed. But when you don't react, when you step back with observation instead of retaliation, you've just taken away the one thing they need to win, your emotional control. You're no longer playing on their field. You've moved the game to another level, where you don't need to raise your voice to win, not by overpowering, but by mastering. You can choose to let every trigger lead to anger, breakdown, and disorientation, or you can choose to turn it into a workout for your evolution. Learn how to fully feel without being consumed. Learn how to detach from your wounded ego and view the situation through the lens of a calm observer. Learn to ask, what is this teaching me? And believe me, there is always a lesson, an opportunity, a spiritual turning point hidden in it. The only question is, are you clear-headed enough to see it? Emotional maturity doesn't come from no longer being triggered. It comes from no longer reacting the same way when touched in the same place. Others may still hurt you. Life may still present unfair situations, but what's changed is you no longer shatter. You've learned how to move through it without leaving yourself behind. You understand that a trigger is a doorway into your inner world, and when you are courageous enough to walk through it, you are no longer the same version of yourself. You are someone who has begun to set yourself free, not with a scream, but with the quiet, steady strength of someone who is truly growing up. Modern society praises quick comebacks, idolizes those who don't let anyone mess with them, and quietly ranks anger as a sign of boldness. People admire sharp retorts, intense displays, emotions laid bare without any filter. Impulsiveness is labeled straightforwardness. Anger is painted as a strong ego, while calmness is often misunderstood as weakness. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The more easily you lose your temper, the more easily you're controlled. The more easily you react, the more easily you're manipulated. And the more easily you explode, the further you drift from true strength. You need to understand, strength is not in the volume of the noise you make, but in your ability to stay centered when everything around you is in chaos. The one who controls themselves is the strongest, not because they win confrontations, but because they never let themselves fall into confrontation in the first place. They know that every explosive reaction is a drain on energy, and they choose the wiser way, to stay in their center, to observe, to evaluate, and to act only when necessary. That is not weakness, that is discipline. Allocation. If you pay attention, the truly formidable people are often the quiet ones. They don't boast, don't lose their temper, don't need to make a scene to prove anything. They let their silence speak for their level. Meanwhile, the loud ones, the quick-to-anger types, are often the ones unstable inside. They seek attention, validation, agreement through intense emotion, because inside they lack solidity. And unfortunately, society is cheering on this very form of expression. Viral videos, dramatic clapbacks, teaching others a lesson style comments are being hailed as standards of strength. But all of this only sustains a dangerous illusion that reacting fast is a sign of power. You don't need to become cold, but you do need to learn when to speak. And more importantly, you need to learn not to let others decide when you should react. Those who try to provoke your anger don't care about your reasons. They're simply trying to drag you down to their level of energy. And if you react, you're stepping into their arena, under their rules. You think you're putting them in their place, but in reality, you've just been pulled into a meaningless fight. And when it's over, you lose your energy, your image, your inner stability, while the other person gains exactly what they wanted, control over your emotions. Remember, you don't need to react to prove you're right. You don't need to raise your voice to show your value. You don't need to lash out to protect your honor. The right silence, the timely restraint, the calmness in chaos, those are the clear signs of true inner strength. And while the crowd may not notice it, those who understand deeply will see it instantly. Outbursts may make you feel powerful for a moment, but they leave lasting cracks in how others see you, and more importantly, in how you see yourself. After impulsiveness, what remains is usually regret. Regret for saying what didn't need to be said, doing what didn't need to be done, becoming part of the chaos you could have walked away from. True strength doesn't leave behind that kind of damage. It leaves behind respect, trust, and stability. And that is something you must train, not to please others, but to live in alignment with the best version of yourself. Society may continue to cheer for noise, but you have the power to choose not to follow it. You can set a different standard. Where composure is power, where silence is strategy, where restraint is a mark of intelligence. You don't need immediate understanding. You don't need to explain. You just need to know you're acting from a place of depth, intention, and clarity. And in that place, you don't need to shout to be heard. You only need to stand firm, grounded, and your voice will echo without needing to be loud. Anger may earn applause from the crowd, but true strength doesn't need their validation. It is quiet, enduring, and unshakable. And if you can master yourself in the very moments you're most easily provoked, you are already stronger than 99% of the world. No shouting, no winning and losing, just holding your height while everything else passes like the wind. You can lose money and earn it back. You can miss opportunities and create new ones. But once your energy is drained, you don't just lose the ability to act, you lose the ability to truly feel life. Energy is not an abstract concept. It's the invisible fuel that determines how you think, how you work, how deeply you can love, and whether you have the strength to withstand life's collisions. And the unfortunate truth is, most people don't realize this until they're exhausted, overwhelmed, disoriented, and no longer excited about anything without understanding why. You think you're tired because you work too much. But the truth is, you're tired because you're carrying too many things that don't belong to you. Fake conversations, one-sided relationships, unspoken expectations, pointless debates, gossip you try to ignore but still hear, situations where you suppress yourself just to keep the peace. All of these are silently draining your energy bit by bit. You don't notice it right away, but one morning you wake up and no longer feel like yourself. You're just operating, not truly living. That's when you need to pause and take a look. Not to blame anyone, but to ask a simple question. Where's my energy flowing each day? Because you cannot grow if that stream is leaking into things that hold no value. You cannot heal if your energy is being absorbed by relationships that make you feel small. You cannot focus if your energy is scattered across trivial matters. And you cannot elevate if your energy is buried in battles you were never meant to fight. Society doesn't teach you how to manage your energy, it teaches you how to manage your time, how to optimize tasks, how to increase productivity. But none of that means anything if you don't have enough energy to begin. You can build the perfect plan, but if your spirit is scattered, if your heart is tired, if your mind is full of noise, no schedule will save you. And when you live in that state long enough, you begin to believe that exhaustion is normal, what it's not. Peace doesn't come from having fewer tasks. It comes from intentionally choosing what deserves space in your mental landscape. Every word you speak, every conversation you engage in, every person you interact with is either charging your energy or quietly draining it. And if you're not alert, you'll trade your precious energy for false approval, meaningless validation, or a presence in relationships just to avoid feeling alone. That's too high a price. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you choose silence, why you no longer react, why you've withdrawn from once close relationships. It's not that you've changed. You're just learning to protect your energy as if it were the greatest asset of your life, because it is. You no longer live to be understood. You live to be whole and complete. And that means you have the right to decline calls that drain you, to leave spaces where you're not respected, to walk away from conversations where you're not truly heard. You can still be loving, compassionate, and kind, but without letting others roam freely in your mind as if they have the right. No one can invade your mental space unless you leave the door open, and once you learn how to close it at the right time, you'll begin to feel your energy restore. You'll feel lighter after conversations instead of heavier. You'll feel calm after decisions instead of confused. You no longer have to perform for anyone's approval. You just need to breathe, and the right things will naturally remain. Don't think protecting your energy is selfish. Selfishness is when you expect others to sacrifice for you. But when you withdraw to care for your inner world, you ensure that everything you give afterward is healthy, grounded, and clean. You no longer give from depletion. You no longer love from emptiness. You no longer rely on endurance to maintain connection, and that is enough. Energy cannot be seen with the eyes, but it is felt by the entire body. You know very well who uplifts you and who drags you down. You feel the difference after every interaction. The question is whether you're listening to those signals. And once you are brave enough to protect your energy as a sacred territory, you'll find that the outside world no longer exhausts you like it used to. Not because the world has changed, but because you've chosen the right place to put your heart, your mind, and your life. That's when you stop being depleted and start truly shining. Silence is not surrender, nor is it a lack of courage. Silence is the strategy of someone who knows they are strong enough that they don't need to prove anything. In a world where everyone is trying to speak faster, react harder, and assert themselves more boldly, your silence becomes a deliberate act, a wordless declaration that cuts sharp. I know enough not to speak. And in that silence, you express a different level, one that doesn't need noise to be recognized, doesn't need loudness to be respected. People often mistake silence for weakness, restraint for helplessness, non-reaction for apathy. But what they don't understand is that staying silent while being insulted, not responding when misunderstood, refusing to engage when dragged into an unnecessary battle, requires a kind of strength that isn't loud but is deeply disciplined. Because anyone can scream, but not everyone can choose to remain still in the storm without letting their soul be blown away. You are not weak because you say nothing. You are strong because you know when to speak and when to withhold your words. Wisdom isn't found in the sharpness of your comeback, but in your ability to read the core of a situation and choose actions that carry more value in the long term. There are battles where silence disorients your opponent, where their anger dissolves into thin air, where criticism loses its target and fades. You don't need a clash because you're no longer on the same frequency. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you've thought it through, seen clearly that what you're about to say won't change anything, or if it does, the price of those words is far too high for the benefit they bring. And so you choose silence, not to swallow resentment, but to preserve peace, not to appear noble, but because you no longer want to take part in repetitive performances staged to satisfy someone's ego. Wisdom comes from experience. You've spoken up before, gotten angry, reacted, and found yourself defeated even when your words won. You know the feeling of speaking to get it off your chest, only to be left feeling hollow. You understand that words spoken without clarity often leave heavier consequences than silence ever could, and you no longer want to pay the price for impulsive reflexes, so now you choose differently, to be silent but observant, not reactive but not indifferent, not retaliating but also not allowing anyone to cross your boundaries. In some situations, silence is how you maintain control. When others rage, you remain silent. When they manipulate emotions, you stay quiet. When they wait for your reaction to start the game they know well, you don't play, and it's your absence from that fight that leaves them disoriented. They don't know what you think, what you feel, what you're preparing, and in that space, you hold the entire advantage. Without striking, you still have power. Silence is also a form of self-respect. You understand your worth so well that you don't need to shout for someone to listen. You don't need to explain to someone who's already decided not to believe you. You don't need to argue with someone who lacks the capacity to understand. Each time you remain silent, you reaffirm your priorities. Peace over victory, stability over emotional impulse, growth over ego. There are things that only become clear through listening. In science, you begin to see the intentions behind words, the motives behind actions, the truth beneath the surface. You're no longer caught by appearances because you've learned to sit still and see deeper. And from there, your decisions don't come from emotion, they come from understanding. Not from reaction, but from depth. True wisdom is when you don't need to speak for others to know you understand everything. Don't let society force you into believing that silence is weakness, because sometimes the silent ones are the most formidable. They don't need to threaten, they don't need to react, but they know exactly where the line is. And once you learn to use silence as a tool to protect yourself, to stay centered, to avoid being drawn into someone else's game, you are no longer easily disturbed. You become someone who guards their inner sky, even when storms rage outside. Silence is not disappearance, it's presence on a deeper level, a space where there's no noise, but there is weight, no drama, but there is influence. And when you're clear-headed enough to choose silence, when everything around you is trying to pull you away from yourself, you're not losing, you're winning strategically. No shouting, no counterattack, just unwavering steadiness. And that is enough. Healing doesn't begin by pushing away what once hurt you. It begins when you dare to turn around and look at it directly, not to relive the pain, but to understand why it exists, where it began, and what part of you is still held by it. Many people confuse healing with forgetting. They think that if they no longer remember, it means they've moved on. But memory doesn't disappear just because you don't mention it. It lies dormant, waiting for a word, a glance, a familiar situation to rise again, even stronger. And if you don't understand the root of the pain, you'll never truly escape its influence. You'll only be living in a fragile, almost okay. Understanding is the first step toward freedom. When you understand why you were hurt, you stop blaming yourself. When you understand why someone did what they did, you stop waiting for an apology. When you realize that emotions are not the enemy but signals, you begin to learn how to process them without drowning in them. And from there you can step out of the loop of unconscious reactions. No longer exploding over small matters, no longer crying over every harsh word, no longer retreating into wounded silence over a gesture. You begin to have a choice, and that choice begins with understanding yourself. You don't have to forgive right away. You don't have to act like you're okay. You don't have to be strong in anyone's eyes. You just need to be honest with how you really feel inside. Some wounds don't require instant forgiveness. They just need to be acknowledged. Some pain doesn't need to be dismissed. It just needs to be heard without judgment. And only when you're brave enough to do that with yourself can your healing journey truly begin. Not by avoidance, but by conversation. Not by forgetting, but by observing with love. There are memories you cannot erase. There are wounds you can't pretend never happened. But you can change how you carry them. No longer as burdens, but as lessons. No longer hidden in darkness, but placed in the light of understanding. No longer letting them shape how you love, how you trust, how you see yourself. Healing is when you can touch that memory and not tremble. When you can revisit the past and no longer choke on it. When you realize that it once hurt, but it no longer controls you. You're not weak because it still hurts. You're strong because you choose to face that hurt without running from it. People often find it easier to fake being okay than to admit they're still wounded. Easier to tough it out than to sit down and say, I haven't moved on yet. But only honesty with yourself opens the real door to healing. And you don't need anyone to understand that process because it doesn't happen out there. It happens in silence, in long nights spent privately with your memories, in moments you don't post online or share with anyone, but you know. Today, you forgave a little more, understood a little deeper, felt a little lighter. Not everyone deserves a second chance, but you always deserve the chance to heal. Not to forget what others did, but to stop letting them control your emotions from a distance. Some people will never apologize. Some endings will never come with an explanation, but you can still choose to close that chapter in your heart. Not through denial, but through acceptance. It happened, but it no longer has the power to decide who you'll become. Healing is the bravest act you can do for yourself. It's not flashy, not loud, and has no cheering audience. It's made of small, intentional steps, day by day. It's when you choose not to react the way you used to. It's when you comfort yourself through weariness. It's when you refuse to enter the same patterns of relationships that once broke you, even if they feel so familiar that you once called them normal. It's when you dare to set new standards for how people are allowed to treat you. That is not selfishness, that is self-respect. You don't need to erase every wound to start living better. You just need to understand that what happened is part of your journey, not a life sentence. And every time you choose understanding over avoidance, every time you choose love over self-blame, you are rewriting how you exist in the world, lighter, deeper, and more real. Not because you forgot, but because you understood. And once you understand, you are no longer bound. You are free, you are yourself, you are whole. And that is where true healing begins. Not everyone who comes into your life has good intentions. Not every display of concern is pure. And not everyone who smiles at you is genuinely happy for you. Some people show up not to walk with you, but to divert you. They don't arrive to lift you up, they come to make you question yourself. And if you're not alert enough to tell the difference, you risk losing the most precious thing you have: clarity of mind. Because a distractor doesn't need to launch a direct attack. They only need to plant a few vague comments, sprinkle in some seemingly caring remarks, flash a glance that mixes empathy with subtle disdain, and let the rest unfold inside you. You think you're exhausted from work pressure, too many responsibilities, but sometimes what breaks you down is the energy you spend on the wrong people, conversations where you constantly self-censor, relationships where you shrink and twist yourself to fit, friends who make you feel guilty just for setting boundaries. These are the subtle forms of distraction, not loud, not obvious, but they quietly drain your life force one drop at a time. The most skillful distractors never present themselves as the problem. They often play the victim, the advisor, the understanding one. They'll say things that sound harmless but carry insidious undertones. You're doing well, but I'm not sure it's sustainable. Or, I'm just worried you'll be disappointed because your expectations seem too high. It sounds like concern, but it's really doubt, disguised. And if you're not solid within, you'll start doubting yourself. You'll feel confused, hesitant, demotivated, without knowing why. Don't underestimate the damage these people can do. They don't need to shout in your face. They just whisper into your weakest spots. And if you don't notice, you'll start living at their frequency, where everything is second-guessed. Every decision needs permission. Every success gets distorted by raised eyebrows and passive-aggressive advice. That's not an environment for growth. That's a space where you'll never break through the limits others have silently placed on you. You must learn to identify and set boundaries with distractors, not because you don't love them, but because you know you can't grow in the chaos they bring. They might be colleagues, relatives, even people you were once close to, but if their presence always makes you question your own worth, if every encounter leaves you unsettled and drained, then you need to step back. No blame, no drama, just enough distance to see clearly. And to protect your internal signal, don't confuse tact with pretense. Someone who's genuine with you doesn't need to play a role. They don't mask envy with concern. They don't manipulate your emotions to keep you close. They don't create storms and then tell you it's because they care. They help you see yourself more clearly, not make you feel more confused, and when you're around them, you feel expanded, not reduced. That is the clearest sign of someone who lifts you up, not someone who keeps you stuck in noise. One of the most common behaviors of a distractor is making you feel like you're too sensitive. They hurt you, then say you're overreacting. They cross your boundaries, then blame you for not taking a joke. They destabilize you, then shrug it off with, I was just saying. And if you're not careful, you'll start doubting your own responses. But remember this, your emotions are the most sophisticated alert system you have. When you feel heavy, breathless, disoriented, that's when you need to trust your intuition, not someone else's excuses. Protecting yourself from distractors doesn't mean you hate them, it simply means you've matured enough to stop letting them interfere with your inner signal. You don't need to cut them off or lash out. Just take a step back, far enough to see their nature clearly, grounded enough not to get swept into the emotions they provoke, and alert enough not to react to games you don't need to play. That's how you reclaim your stillness. And when the interference is gone, you'll realize you were always clear. You just stood too close to people who made everything feel chaotic. Not anymore. Now you hold your own frequency, your own rhythm, your own inner strength, untouched by anyone else's noise. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. You don't need to justify every choice, every feeling, every step, just to satisfy others' curiosity or judgments. There is a kind of power that doesn't come from words, but from silent consistency. A kind of energy that needs no promotion, because it naturally emits a clear signal through the way you live. And if you live authentically enough, deeply enough, mindfully enough, you'll see your life will speak on its own, louder than any defense you ever thought you had to make. You don't need to argue for your rightness in other people's eyes. Those who once misunderstood you will look again. Those who once belittled you will go quiet. Those who once doubted you will be forced to face the unwavering presence you've built without you having to say a word. That's what happens when you stop living to react and start living to build. When your energy is no longer spent on explanations but focused entirely on action, discipline, and growth, everything you've been quietly creating will become impossible to ignore. Life has its own way of delivering your voice to where it needs to be. No shouting, no competing, no demand for immediate recognition, just consistency. The habits you quietly repeat each day will speak for you. The boundaries you silently enforce will define your ground. The moments you choose to withdraw from chaos instead of joining it will assert your depth. And one day you'll realize, without applause, without agreement, you're still walking your clear path, because your life has already become the evidence. The strongest voice isn't the one that speaks the most. It's the one that resonates through outcomes, through the alignment between what you believe and how you live, through the moments you refuse to trade peace for fleeting approval from the crowd, through the quiet confidence of knowing who you are and living by it, even if no one acknowledges it, praises it, or agrees with it. The truly strong don't declare their strength. The truly successful don't shout about their success. They don't speak, but everything around them speaks for them, and you, if you stay steady, will become one of them. You'll start to notice those who talk the most are often the ones least certain. They need to hear their own voice to believe what they're trying to prove. But you, if you are solid, you won't need to explain much. You'll only need to live true. Every choice you make, every step you take, every day you don't give up, will gradually paint a picture others can't ignore. That's when your presence begins to shift the atmosphere. No pressure, no proving, just clarity. Maybe you were once tired from having to talk so much just to be understood. Maybe you felt sad from being misunderstood. Maybe you were angry from being misjudged. But you'll grow into a stage of life where you understand truth doesn't need to shout to survive. It needs you to live by it. Misunderstandings don't need word-by-word correction. They need you to live with such clarity that over time, all falsehoods fall away. And the respect you seek won't come from fleeting compliments, but from the silent reverence people feel in the face of your long-built consistency. Quiet, but unshakable. Your life is a living declaration. How you act when insulted, how you respond when misunderstood, how you stay grounded when everything around you tries to pull you off course. It's all a voice. And it's a voice no one can deny, no one can twist, because it doesn't live in your words. It lives in your way of being. Your journey is your message. Your discipline is your affirmation. Your calm is your answer to chaos. And you don't need to shout to be heard, because you've already become an echo that others cannot ignore. Don't fear silence. Don't fear temporary misunderstanding. Don't fear the glances that don't get you right away. Because when you live right, live true, live with direction, time becomes the greatest advocate on your behalf. It will carry you through doubt, through noise, through gossip, and place you exactly where you deserve to be. Not by luck, but because you've lived clearly enough for your life to speak in place of everything else. And that voice, no one can silence, no one can overlook, no one can deny. Because it doesn't come from your mouth, it comes from your existence. And nothing echoes farther than that.